Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Minted Podcast. On today's episode, we have a treat for you. We have the co-founder and CEO of What's Trending, the host of the podcast Inside Web3, and also somebody who has interviewed the likes of Mark Cuban, Logan Paul, Lizzo, Joan Rivers, Katy Perry, the late Larry King, and pretty much a ridiculous amount of other people that you would all know. The list could go on, but the fact is our guest today, I would say, is one of the top voices with helping keep you up to date with what's happening in the NFT and Web3 space. Friends, welcome Shira Lazar to the Minted Podcast. Shira, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for that lovely intro. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not too hard to write an intro for you with all that you've done, but I am excited to have you on the show. We're going to talk about NFTs, Web3, and all of this stuff, but I do want to ask you we've both been in the interviewing and moderating spaces.
Yep.
Just before this, we were talking, we both got to interview Mark Cuban and found FADME, I think 2 months apart, which was fun. I'm curious, out of all of the conversations you've had, there's got to be some that just stick out for you personally. I'm sure some maybe got you more exposure, but are there any moments with some of the interviews you've done that stick out and they've made an impact and been memorable for you?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's like children. It's hard to find one that you love better. No, there are definitely the ones though that there are memories around. I mean, you kind of mentioned it in the highlights. There are icons like the Larry King one where you think to yourself wow, I grew up with this person and now they're in my studio. This is weird. Right? And then when they pass on, looking back at it is a really special thing. Same with Joan Rivers. I mean, that definitely goes down because I didn't know what to expect from her. She could either love you or hate you. Those are always interesting interviews because you're just going into the day hoping for the best, and you do as much research as you can. I watched her documentary and learned even more about her. And then when I met her in person before the interview on stage at Internet Week New York, I had an hour on stage. So that's either going to be a really fun hour or a torturous hour.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of time.
That's a lot of time for someone who's famous and yet a stranger to you, right? And you go in, you're like, hey, I'm about to talk to you. I hope you like me, right? And right off the bat, when I told her I saw the documentary and I loved it, she's like, oh, you're just blowing smoke up my ass. And I'm like, oh God, this is going to be interesting. She doesn't even trust that I'm telling her the truth.
Right.
And yet when we started to talk, we had just such an amazing conversation. It's, when you're in your flow during an interview, there's something so special and zen about it. You're present with that person. They're just opening up and sharing their truth, and you're holding space for them as well. It's a beautiful dance of sorts when it works. And then after the fact, we were taking pictures backstage, and she says to me, she puts her hand on my shoulder and she looks at me and she goes, "You're really great at what you do." And that for me, I just remember that stood out as such a beautiful moment. Yeah. And then there's folks that just really inspire me, like Tabitha Brown, who is an incredible creator and Black woman and so inspiring. And when I was interviewing her, I was just constantly crying. She talked about everything. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. And then being able to talk to Mark, or even someone like Robert Rodriguez, people that I've gotten to know personally, but that are just so known professionally. And yet every time you talk to them, you continue to be blown away by their brilliance and how cool they are and their insights about everything. That's always really awesome too.
Yeah, I think you described it well, of it being a dance, because you probably have questions that you want to ask, but then you also have this high profile person where it's they usually have something that they hope is accomplished with the conversation. And then there's the audience. And then there might be the person who's running the show. There's always different people involved. And you kind of, when you're in the place of a moderator, it's a dance where you kind of have to think through these things. And yeah, I think you described it well.
Yeah. And then there's the moments of huge fails. Like this will go down, like Seth Rogen at South by Southwest. He got booked really last minute and he was promoting this comic book series, graphic novel series that he was doing, something like that. And the area that I was in, like they misspelled his last name. It's, I think it's ROG. And even now I'm forgetting it, but
I
like
think it's just AN.
ROGEN, and they said AN.
Oh,
and
it's
so
EN, okay.
right away that happened. And then he saw that he's like, this person didn't do their research and watch my show. I'm like, give me a break. Like you just got booked on this. We have someone coming every 30 minutes for like the entire day. No offense. You are amazing. And I would love to have done more research, but give me a break. And he just dragged me under the bus. And of course he's a comedian. So he was getting laughs and he continued just to like lean into it. And it was just really hard and cringy to experience and watch.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always interesting to watch. I mean, it's important for us to be able to watch those back, and like we have to go watch them back, but sometimes it's hard.
God.
Recently
Yes.
I mean, everything is recent in the NFT and Web3 space, but you've been talking to a lot of people about Web3 and NFTs with your show Inside Web3 and even with the Twitter spaces you're doing. Why do you care about this space?
Yeah, I think for me, there's some sort of beautiful energy and creativity and culture emerging. I feel like it always excites me to be in places that empower people to level up and be their best selves and really express their truths. And in this space, you have something for everyone. If numbers and money is your thing, there's something there. If you're a technologist or an engineer, there's something there. If you believe in equity and equality and fundraising and impact, there's something there. If you're an artist and you love creativity, there's something there. So that is really exciting for me. And it also excites me when community comes together. And I think that when that happens, you feel a sense of purpose and connection. And that's a really beautiful thing that always is very intriguing to me as someone who reports about culture through the lens of tech and media. And so that was originally, I guess, what got me attracted to this space. I mean, I saw Gary Vaynerchuk playing. I saw people I knew like Randy Zuckerberg, and I was reading, their Instagram posts, the newsletters, but it was really when I started playing in this space myself where I started feeling the energy, and that's all I could describe it as of the space, and then the warmth of everyone involved, and that people were really enthusiastic and cared. And I think that's something I felt was lost from Web 2 and the influencer creator economy space that became very boring and I would say superficial. And I don't know, I felt I was feeling uninspired in the space. And so I think that when I started to see what was coming up and emerging from Web 3, it was like the wind came back under my wings. You know what I mean? Like if I was sailing and I was just like sitting there because I hadn't had any movement for the past few years, finally I was like, ooh, there's movement again. Yes. So that's all the stuff that really excited me. And then I got to dive in more, get to know people. And of course, there's a lot of bad actors. We all know there's the scams, the trolls, but on the other side of that, on the flip side, there's just a lot of goodness and possibility, which is what I love because, there's a lot of crap right now happening in the world. And I try to have optimism and hope. And I think that when you look at that side of things and the people that are doing good, there's a lot of good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's said really well with like the warmth and the community aspect. I feel like as we've been talking to more content creators about how to use NFTs, we say often that, NFTs and Web3 is a great place to build community. They're great tools to build community. And then I believe that money and resources follow community. I think a lot of people have it
Yeah.
backwards where they're like, okay, cool, let's, launch an NFT project and get a bunch of money. And it's like the best NFT projects are the ones that have the best community. So I think I've seen similar things where it seems overall, yes, there's bad players, that there's just a really collaborative feel to the Web3 space. You also mentioned equity and inclusion. And I think that's a really exciting piece of Web3. You've spoken a lot about this. I think, is your space every single week with the women in Web3?
I try to do it every week. I just came off of recording it, actually. And I had Carly Riley from the Overpriced JPEGs podcast, who's amazing as a female voice in the space herself. And she did a whole documentary in Puerto Rico looking at the artists and the locals in the blockchain community there. And I thought that was a really great intersection of what does excite me about this space, where, I myself, as a woman, seeing other women win, that's exciting. Having been in the tech Web2 space, I just saw a lot of my friends and peers were men, and they're the ones who started like the big companies that we all came to know. And while that was really awesome, and I saw them from the beginning, there was also something very crappy about it, because it made me feel like, am I going to ever be the person to build something myself? Or am I just going to be the communications, marketing, storyteller? And is that even valuable? Right? Or am I just a commodity? And that's what, Web2 really made you think that you were valuable as a creator, but there was a bit of a toxicity, because it also was like, well, but we're not going to pay you for this. And, we're not going to give you equity. I actually posted this on LinkedIn, where I think Maker Studios was one of the only companies to really get bought that was creator founded. Of course, now we have, those like Logan Paul and Jake Paul building companies, and Mr. Beast again, and FaZe Clan, all dudes, white dudes, basically. So when you look at that as a woman or any other underrepresented or minority group, you say, is it possible for me? And so what I love about Web3 is I'm just seeing so many more leaders and founders who are from so many different, backgrounds, genders, races, and even like cities around the world. And that makes me feel like this is going to be, a new era of possibility where, when you see yourself as a leader, when you see yourself as an equity holder, you feel like, okay, it's possible for me too. And that's going to change the types of products we build. Mm-hmm. And it's going to change the type of leadership we have and the type of culture we create. So I want to spotlight those stories because it supports me and my vision. And then hopefully it supports others too.
Right. Well, and it's so important to do. And, for the people that are watching this, I am a white male. And so I'll be the first to admit that.
How dare you know?
Growing up, yes, there's opportunities, but I think it took me a while to really realize the reality is that opportunities probably are coming more my way than others. You even just look into some industries that are led primarily by white males. And I think that there is a really exciting energy around the Web3 space because there's less barriers to who wins. And I think that overall, our culture is making so much progress towards equity and inclusion, but it's really exciting to see the NFT and Web3 space where it's not as much about that stuff. It's not as much about it. It's all so new. And so I think that's been an exciting thing for me to see is just there's less barriers between who gets to be successful and who doesn't, which means that the best work rises to the top. And the people that are doing really, really good work are going to have the opportunity to be successful regardless of what their background is. And I think that voices like you that are highlighting those stories is so important right now.
Yeah. And while we are creating a new space and new paradigms, right? It is important to be aware of where we have been and the barriers for entry. While yes, there are tools that make this easier than ever before. That's why a lot of us talk about content storytelling and education, how important it is, so that people do not get left behind, those who have been left behind previously in other innovative tech revolutions, which is why I love the work that BFF is doing. I'm a founding member of BFF. I think that if you are someone that has knowledge and can really break something down so it's easy to understand, there is a need for that right now. And that's also what I'm very passionate about. Like, I'm a student. So if anything, I always say, like, I am not an expert, including in a space that's so young. But guess what? I get excited about this. I'm passionate about it. So I'm going to bring you along the journey with me. Right. And that doesn't mean this is for everyone. Like, not everyone will just say, okay, that's what I'm going to do in this space. But for me, that was very clear as someone who in Web2 was interviewing people, was breaking down what was trending, what was viral, the context, the why. It was obvious for me that there could be an opening to do the same thing here.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to what opportunities you see for Web3 and NFTs for content creators. There's a lot of podcasts, including both of ours, about NFTs and about Web3, but there's still not a lot of content creators that are actually launching NFT projects or building Web3 communities for their audience. And so I'm curious to what opportunities you see for content creators, whether it's podcasters, streamers, YouTubers, whatever kind of category they're in. What opportunities are there for creators with NFTs that you see coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of skepticism and fear of bringing this to your community in case your community thinks like, oh, you're trying to, scam them or force something down their throats that they don't like. And so there's been a lot of content creators that have gotten shit for it.
Yep.
To the point where, they'll get unfollows because they're promoting this stuff and people think they're doing something sketchy or sleazy, which is unfortunate because, there are people that will do that, but including if you're promoting or shilling someone else's thing. But if it's your thing, I think that the community needs to look at it as a new type of Patreon, right? It's like a Patreon, but on the blockchain, which means you can easily track what was bought and sold. And you can also better get access to the things that the creator is trying to give you access to, right? So that could mean access to a chat room or a community like Discord or Geneva, right? It could mean additional content or exclusive content. It could mean, now it's Shopify. Shopify even has tools that if you buy the NFT, it becomes like a ticket for discounted merch. So I think you need to think about it. And community needs to think about it not just as like a way to make a ton of money and, you're trying to run a Ponzi scheme, and as a new form of ticketing or membership to a community that they care about. And what you need to be thinking about as a creator is, just like you've been constantly doing, probably and hopefully, how do I provide additional value using these tools? And how do I innovate using these tools? So I think that in the end, an NFT is just going to be like an additional entryway for something more to get better and more access to you. And I actually think all of this will be integrated into every major platform. As we see, it's already happening with Twitter. You're going to be able to pay and tip on every platform with crypto as well. Or possibly, you'll be able to use your NFT to, buy it through these platforms very easily. So it's going to be more seamless. Right now, It's very clunky. It feels like less accessible. And a lot of times I would say also, if you're going to venture into the space, to make it even easier, you have to be very clear about how to use these things. So like what I saw, Joel from, why am I blanking it? Walk Off the Earth. They were a very popular band. They went viral YouTube back in the day. They launched their own little animated series with these characters for the holidays. They got a ton of pushback. A big part of it was on Solana, which is hard to get to. It's easier now, but at the time it was a different onboarding process than just going on Ethereum or going on OpenSea. And I was telling him, and I tell this to other creators, like, you need to do an info video on exactly how people could do this, how you can buy it, what happens next, like literally a demo video. Right. And so like, that's also something people forget about. I also think platforms like Fireside, we mentioned Mark and Fallon, are really interesting because they're going to help you build a network or go live. So you could have on-demand or live content. And if your community buys the NFT, it's like a ticket to get access to that. And so that allows you to better monetize as well. So I hope, some of those things sparked maybe some ideas for some folks. And also what's cool is I think the collaboration and co-creation that you mentioned. So if you care about certain things in the world, or you also want to make an impact, there's ways to support other artists who can maybe create the art for you. And then you could launch something together, or you could raise money for a certain cause using an NFT too with your community. So there are a lot of options there.
Yeah, we just had somebody on the show a few weeks back, Crystal Fabella, and her community is called Filipino on the Rise. Really successful podcast for like first and second generation Filipino immigrants.
Yeah.
And they launched an NFT project for her community where the artist got a cut and then 50% of the sales went into a treasury. And those NFT holders are now going to decide, what do we want to do with this money that supports Filipino excellence and that advances it? And so she was able to get her community to come together and say, yes, this show is about celebrating Filipino excellence, but now let's actually use our resources to come together and form this community that then is advancing Filipino excellence. And it's just going to be so fun to see what opportunities we see coming forward and what case studies we see with creators.
That is so cool. I love that. And it made me think of a few other folks that are doing some interesting stuff that if you're a creator, you should check out. Of course, Farouk and Rug Radio, what he's doing as a decentralized media network and building a way to tokenize the experience so that if you're a listener or consumer, you get something back for engagement, right? So it's a win-win. And then if you're on the other side where you're contributing or you're creating the content, possibly you're getting paid for that from Rug Radio, but then also beyond that, you get paid depending on, maybe the amount of people who read or engage with that piece of content too. So it's a really easy way to create scalability and also monetization right off the bat, and that you can track. Because I think the hardest thing with a lot of these platforms that we've come to know, if you're a contributor on the Huffington Post or that, like a lot of times it happened for free, or you maybe got paid a certain amount of money, a stipend or an amount per post or video. But then if you did like rev share deals, there's a bit of a lack of transparency with really understanding who's actually consuming this, how much money would you make? But like these tools and technologies change that, which is really cool. And then they also have this DAO, so they kind of can all vote. A decentralized autonomous organization, a self-governing organization, that if you bought the NFT or the token to get in and be part of this, you could vote on who has a show or what types of content you want. And that really changes the way we look at a media network. So I think those types of models are really cool, and something even with what's trending, I'm trying to figure out, because we're a Web2 company, we do cover Web3, but how do we actually start building on Web3 and
soon your audience is there. I mean, creators. They're probably already coming to you and saying like, all right, what are you guys going to do? What project?
I know. Yeah. That's what the weird thing is, because I'm so deep in it and I've been trying to still figure out how I bring what's trending in it. There are some ideas, and it's one of those things, like, because I have team members and something that's already working in a way, doesn't mean it's going to work for the long term. But right now it's working. And when you have a model that works in media, you're like, I don't want to touch it right now. And yet we know that it's important to make those moves, not when you need to, right? In a reactive way. So anyway, overall, I hope you realize as a creator, lots of opportunities. David Bianchi is also someone to check out. He's doing his like short films on the blockchain as well, which is really cool. So, and there's so much going on in the music space. So a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a lot of opportunity. You mentioned some of the challenges with just education. What are the big challenges that you think content creators will run into as they start releasing more NFT projects and bringing their audience into Web3?
Definitely trust. I think trust and understanding of how to even like do all of this or get onboarded. I think that's all going to be really difficult, right? So it's important to be very transparent, be very communicative. Don't get scared because people don't get it or there will be trolls or haters. I think that if you believe in something and you care about it, you will have some of your community that might not get it, right? But some will, because they believe in you and care about it. And then you're going to also attract a whole new audience. So you have to think about, I think, as a creator, previously back in the day, there were creators in other spaces, and then new things popped up like social media. And those people got a lot of hate when they segged into that. But, look at those people now who decided to take the leap. Yeah. So I think you need to understand when it's the right moment to do it and not necessarily ignore or leave your entire audience, but how do you do it in a way that makes sense for you? Because you don't want to alienate people, but you want to figure out what's the story and what's the point of connection that people will get it, and how do you support them in getting there? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what you mentioned earlier with one of the projects, that, the education side of it, like content creators, it's on us to educate our audience on how to engage with these projects. And right now it's still a little clunky. There's a lot of platforms out there right now. I guess not a lot, but there's more are coming. It seems like every month that are making it easier for content creators to launch, which is good. And that's this podcast is sponsored by Uncut, and I think they do a great job. But I think there's more and more platforms like them and like others that I think are making it easier. But the platform doesn't it doesn't take away the responsibility from the creator to still educate. And to still we still have to teach our audience how to use this stuff.
Yeah. And I think it helps to be honest that you're still learning yourself, that you don't have all the answers. I think when you act like everything's perfect and there's no issues is when people start to raise red flags. So if you bring someone along the journey with you, I think it seems more authentic, and it makes it feel like it's okay for there to be mistakes, right? Or bumps along the road. And there's a ton of people that are leaning into the education space. I mean, I just was talking to Mech, who co-hosts with Ryan Carson, who is an investor, does a great daily Twitter Spaces show called the NFT Daily Dose. There's people like him. I mean, Farouk from Rug Radio doing great stuff. Brian Fanzo, who you've had on. And there's a lot of podcasts in the space. And I think that we're also trying to figure out the video side. How do we create more video? And that doesn't feel as industry or, insider, right? How do you think about the people on the outside that are just learning about this? So for Inside Web3, my podcast, whenever I have a guest on, I always say, just pretend you're on MSNBC or CNN. How would you explain this, or NPR, to your parents or your child, right?
Totally.
And I think that's really important to think of it like that, because there's so many terms, there's so many buzzwords, and that could really intimidate someone or scare them away. And if you really care about the growth of this beyond you and how you're winning, you might be winning because you're in a big fish in a small pond. And that could, not to judge, but that could be very selfish, because in the end, in order for us to WAGMI, we all gonna make it, we really need to see other people. I would say it doesn't mean they need to be creating the space, but understand it, and at least understand that this is where money, tech, and creativity is going. And there's gonna be a lot of jobs, and we get to see more people being curious and understanding this. And so, all of us come from different industries and entryways. And so I think the first thing for you is to learn yourself, and then figure out what does that mean to the industry you're connected to or the community that you're building. And once again, you might not get it, and that's okay. You might say this doesn't make sense now, but just know, I would say that it's coming. And I just want you to be ready for that. And I just want everyone to be ready who felt left behind in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's well said. I wanted to close this interview with asking, like, what are your words of wisdom to content creators that are thinking about all of this stuff, but there's hesitations to how to get in. You kind of already said some of that, but what would kind of some of your words of encouragement be to the content creators that love the idea of NFTs and Web3? They're learning about it, but they are not really sure where to actually get plugged in.
Yeah, I would say Twitter is making a comeback. Hopefully it's still around in the same way after this whole Elon Musk takeover. But I would say there's a lot of great voices emerging from Twitter. Again, I mentioned some of those. Obviously, follow me at Shira Lazar. There's great spaces that are focusing on education for underrepresented and minority groups. BFF, Black at XYZ, there's podcasts like Bankless HQ, like Bad Girls Club, Brian Fanzo at iSocial Fans, Inside Web3. We're all doing this. And so it's about finding what personality and community makes sense for you. And then once again, constantly being open to learn because the space is moving very quickly. Mm-hmm. That said, be patient and, it's important to lean in and know when you need to step back, because sometimes you just get overwhelmed and you're like, and then it's not good to work when you're stressed out and reactive and just functioning in fear and anxiety. Yes. So you might have weeks that you're like consuming and connecting and feeling the energy. And sometimes you need to step back, and that's okay. And I would say also find events in real life. Because I think what I've seen is a lot of people who don't get this industry or the space, they start getting it when they start meeting people IRL and creating real life connections, because that's when then you get to ask those questions. And I hope that you ask whatever question. There's no stupid questions, but when you really find people that you trust and that you connect with, you could start, as they say, shooting the shit with them and sharing things and learning together. And that is really fun. And I think that's when you start really getting it and the possibility as well.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference once you get out from behind your computer and actually start talking to people in real life about this stuff. And, you even just seeing the passion when people are talking about it. And like you said, having a space to be able to answer and ask those questions is huge. Shira, this has been a treat for our audience. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to come and just talk about what you're seeing when you do launch your NFT project, whether it's individual one or with What's Trending or with Inside Web3. You have to come back and tell us about it. We'll be curious to see what decisions you guys make when rolling out.
Oh, appreciate it. Yeah, I see, like, even as a content creator myself, I'm not jumping in so quickly in that way. I found a gap and where I can add value, and I leaned into that.
And where you can learn too.
Exactly, because a lot of times people rush because they think it's like, got to do it. Mm-hmm. And then it doesn't feel like the right thing. Like, figure out what's right for you. And sometimes that means it takes some time. Yep. And so, I have things that I'm building, and I'm not necessarily doing things overnight, but there's a lot of ideas that are brewing. And so, I'll definitely share when that is ready. I must say, I'm starting a weekly newsletter for those who are new to this space or those who are too busy to keep up. So it's called The Alpha, working title. You see, it's like still TBD in that way. But you could go to my Twitter to sign up for that as well.
Love it. We will link to all the resources that you mentioned.
Amazing.
Here in the description, and we'll have the Alpha linked as well. Again, Shira, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this conversation on the Minted Podcast.